Hello and welcome back to another episode of You Want to Do What with Dan and Julie. Today we have Raven on, who is an archaeologist. Hi, how are you?
I'm very good. Thank you so much. How are you guys doing?
Really well, thanks.
It's a bit hot here.
It's really hot here.
Yeah.
And we're in a conservatory.
You're in a conservatory. Oh gosh.
Yeah, not ideal. So what do you actually do, Raven? What is an archaeologist? What do they get up to?
So an archaeologist essentially studies the human past by analyzing material remains. So pretty much everything we leave behind while living our lives will eventually get buried over time and be built on top of. And that means we kind of leave hints and traces of what we used to do, how we used to live. And archaeologists dig that back up and try to piece together what humans in the past used to do, what they ate, what was important to them, everything like that.
So my sort of knowledge of archaeology and archaeologists comes from a TV show called Time Team that I used to watch when I was little, and maybe Indiana Jones. How does somebody sort of fall into or go into archaeology? How did you get into it?
For me, I was that really big nerd even when I was a little kid, always obsessed with ancient Egypt and the Greek mythology and all of that. So that was what I would do every Saturday morning. I'd go to the library and I'd get the little VHS tape of, I'm dating myself now. I get the VHS of Pegasus, and Bellerophon. I get the books on the Great Pyramids. But everyone really, from my experience, we always have our big heroes, Indiana Jones, all of them, Lara Croft, even though they aren't true depictions of the field, they do help with inspiring.
You don't have a gun, hat, and a whip.
I do have a hat, no gun, no whip, though.
What kind of area of archaeology do you specialize in? Do you have sort of a time period that you sort of are more interested in?
Yes, so for me, I am mostly Egyptian and Middle Eastern, but I also really love Roman archaeology as well. So that's what I studied in university.
Okay.
And how was university studying those?
It was really fun. It is a bit challenging. There's a lot of theory you have to learn. Of course, the very first Archaeology 101 class, the professor asks, who's here to study dinosaurs? And then half the class gets disappointed. So we have to weed out those people first. But, it can be very intense, but it's super exciting. And it's pretty much like being a detective because you're only given a small part of the past and not everything lasts. Everything's decompose, people rebuild, take things away. So when you're studying it, you really have to start looking for clues and trying to see a bigger picture. And then also, if you're lucky, or the opposite, depending on who you are, you get to learn some ancient languages that are very difficult. So that's what I got to do. I got to learn hieroglyphs, which was really exciting for me.
That's pretty cool.
Actually, that was one of the things when I was looking to go to university. I wanted to study classics because I loved the Greek mythology and Greek literature. And actually, one thing that put me off was learning Latin, which was one of the common things to learn with it. And I didn't want to do it. It was actually the put off for me.
It was very smart to not learn Latin, though, in my opinion. I did it for a semester, and it was terrible.
Yeah. So what made you so interested in ancient Egypt and sort of the Roman and that part of history? What really interests you about that?
Well, I kind of grew up in the suburbs of Canada, so there wasn't really much going on there. And for me, having these fantastical stories of lands far away with these amazing buildings built thousands of years ago, and for me, that was really hard to grasp when I was little because, in Canada, everything is maybe 200 years old. So for me, having that fascination with what people used to do and how people made these amazing things and had all this art and these buildings that they did with only very primitive tools, and that was really exciting for me. And then the other thing was I was always very interested in old stuff and how things can tell a story. You know, there's reading history, but then there's having an object and having someone tell you how much you can learn just from this one piece of pottery or this one burial or one wall painting, and having that kind of storytelling from just the little things, that was really exciting for me.
That is cool. I studied classics at school, actually, and there was sort of an archaeology unit on it, and we studied people like Heinrich Schliemann, the guy who discovered Troy.
Oh, yes.
And like Howard Carter in Egypt, and how their archaeology compared to what we can do now is just, it's a different sort of ball game. Does the future of archaeology sort of excite you, the possibilities of what we might be able to uncover from these items going forward?
Oh, so much. There's, you know, if we're going back to Schliemann, he didn't really know what he was doing. He was also not a trained archaeologist at the time. So he was just digging and hoping, hoping a prayer just to get something. And nowadays, you can do so much. We have ground penetrating radar to find features. We have drones. We have satellites. We know people that are identifying sites in ancient Egypt just from using satellites. And we have new technology like LIDAR, which is helping us get through dense forests in Asia and South America. So
wow.
In reality, yeah, people think we found everything, but in reality, there's so much left.
There was
that we can find, and with technology.
There was a BBC program actually which talked about the satellites finding more pyramids in Egypt under the desert, and in old cities and things that we never knew existed. That must really get you excited.
So excited, and one day, fingers crossed, I'll be able to either be part of a team that that finds one, or even just helps excavate it once it is found, because you just never know. You have to always be ready to be surprised, which is a really fun part of the job.
So what was the process after university and then becoming an archaeologist? What was it you did? How did you get into it from there?
Well, I am still in the process, because it's not a very lucrative field, we can put it that way. So after you graduate your bachelor's, you do have the opportunity to work, depending on where you are, but I know especially in the UK, you can begin working in the commercial sector. So doing all of the pre-construction archaeology that has to be done to make sure that nothing is being disturbed for a new building project. So you can technically start working commercially after a bachelor's, but if you want to get any more of a supervisory position, if you want to work abroad, maybe have your own dig in Greece or Egypt or anywhere like that, you probably would have to start getting a master's, even a supervisory position in commercial archaeology, for example. And then if you want to teach, or if you want to supervise your own dig and kind of get the funding to be that person that makes all those big discoveries, you need a PhD. So there is quite a bit of education involved, plus a lot of field work. So in your bachelor, you have to do at least one field work experience, a field school. It can be anywhere you want as long as it's approved. And then after that, you really have to try and get as much experience as you can. And that would really help.
So that's a lot of university and education to sort of get to a level where you can do it commercially. Once you've sort of done that, and you're on these commercial sites, or you're off on digs, what's an average day for an archaeologist? What do you do?
Ooh, it does vary a little bit, but the general thing, if you're digging, for example, in the summer on a field school somewhere, you wake up very early, probably around 5 a.m., maybe earlier, and you either have a quick breakfast or you help make the breakfast that you'll be eating on site. You drive off to site, you get there 6 in the morning because the sun will kill you if you don't start early, and you dig for, it's bad. But yeah, you start digging and you have a little bit of a mid-morning break for breakfast, and then you go dig again, and then you have another little coffee break sometimes, and around 1 or 2 p.m. you break and you have lunch, Then there's usually a nice little siesta, which was my favorite part for digging in Greece, for example. Like a little 2-3 hour nap, which is always nice. And then afterwards, you have to do either you go back to the field depending on where you're digging when the sun is less hot, or it's lab work. So a lot of it would be washing the pottery that you dug up that day, drying the pottery. If you are a specialist, there'll be some drawing of pottery, or you'll be analyzing any bones that were found, any shells, anything that maybe isn't as typical as pottery per se, because we find a lot of pottery. And then you kind of do all those things. So much pottery, tell me. It's like the plastic of the ancient world.
You can tell so much from it though, can't you?
You really can. If you get the right pieces, you can tell what kind of piece, like what kind of vessel it was, what it was used for. Sometimes if it's a whole vessel, you can reconstruct it. You might be able to find food residue in the bottom. I know someone from Egypt they found yeast residue, and they were able to grow it and make bread.
Wow.
Ancient Egyptian bread, which is crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, actually,
that's another thing.
A dig of a mammoth, actually, a bit different. But as soon as they dug it up, the bloke just stuck his hand in, pulled off a bit of meat and ate it. He was like, who else has tried a mammoth before?
Oh my god.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was kind of crazy.
Doing that.
No, I wouldn't either. So what are some of like the things you obviously said a dig, but a dig is it's not just you out there with a spade. What sort of like the techniques and things that you guys do during the dig?
Well, first thing would be to find the spot to dig, and that actually happens off-site with a lot of studying records or using satellites, survey work on-site where you're just kind of walking up and down to see if you find any artifacts on the surface that might suggest something underneath. Then you have to map out your dig. We always use grids because whatever we find has to be located directly in the same spot. We don't want to take anything out without marking its location. And then we use a lot of different materials. We use pickaxes, depending on where you are, of course. And if you're in, somewhere in Europe, you mostly will use pickaxes to get at the hard dirt for the main things. But then we have our very famous trowels that we all love, and that's for more of the fine work. Yeah, we love our trowels. Leveling them out, we use that. But then you can use something as simple and as very delicate as a spoon, or if you're digging out post holes or small areas that your trowel can't get in. We use brushes for delicate materials. We have pretty much every kind of tool imaginable. Some commercial places also have big bulldozers and things to take out large amounts of dirt, as long as we know that it's not going to damage anything.
So what's the coolest
it is quite a varied thing
you've ever found?
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a hard question. Everyone always asks this, and it's always very difficult for any archaeologist to answer, because for us, even the smallest little weird thing could be super exciting. And then everyone else looks at it and goes, oh, it's just a weird piece of pottery. But I will say one of the coolest things that I found is I found an oil lamp.
That's cool.
An ancient Greek oil lamp. It was very exciting.
That is cool.
And it was a complete one. Yeah.
What was it made out of?
I was really happy with that.
Ceramic?
It was ceramic, yes. And it was from around the 4th century BCE.
Wow, that's mad when you think about it, isn't it?
That's like you holding that and just thinking that someone lit this all that time ago.
Yeah.
You get such a high, it's amazing, because it's amazing to find something that hasn't been touched for 2,000 years and no one knew was there.
With history like that, especially ancient Egypt, what always amazes me is when the Romans came to Egypt, the pyramids were already ancient to them. So when you study all this period of history, you see humankind develop, and it's so cool.
It's crazy. Well, even to drive that further, when King Tut was alive, the pyramids were already 1,000 years old.
That's just mad.
Yeah, the history is just crazy. So
how did they build? Right, you probably get this all the time. How did they build the pyramids all those thousands of years ago? Like, how is that? And they perfect triangles, aren't they? Like the symmetry's perfect on them.
they're pretty darn close. I actually have a YouTube video about that, how they built it, but
Awesome.
there's a lot of complicated, bureaucracy and the people arguing about how it was built, but we know that they had the materials even 4,000 years ago to cut granite and limestone with using very simple stone tools and copper saws and drills. We've done a lot of experiments with archaeology on how to do that. So they would dig the quarry for the Great Pyramid of Giza, the big one,
Mm-hmm.
was about 350 meters away from Giza. So it was very close. And then they'd cut the bricks, cut those stones, and use ramps. We found evidence from tombs showing that they've been able to move very large statues of about 12 tons by using sledges on the sand and just by wetting the sand in front of it to make more of a smoother surface to drag it over.
I think what interests
And
me about
it seems
these people is they're so ingenuitive with what they had. We always look to solve issues and we just think technology, but they didn't have access to anything so they solved problems, sometimes the most simple ways, but it seemed to work for them.
That's it. Usually the best answer is the simplest one, and people really, especially the ancient aliens people, they just want to overcomplicate something that if you really work hard enough to do, you can do it.
I have to say, I have watched that Ancient Aliens series on the History Channel. I've watched a few of them, and they produce it in a way that makes you go, oh, actually, yeah, that could be true. But then, obviously, a lot of it's, hyperbole.
Oh, yes. A lot of it is. It angers me to watch that show. Whenever it comes on, I get very angry.
So you're obviously away on digs. You're in labs. It's not an office job, is it? You're all over the place. You travel and things like that. Is that something you really enjoy about it?
I do. I really love the opportunity to travel, and I know I've been very fortunate to have the opportunity to, because a lot of people, they do. You can get a job in the office just working on the post-excavation pottery drawing, writing reports, but for me to be able to just kind of pick up and go wherever they need help essentially is really fun. And to be honest, I have not yet been paid to do so, but being able to do it is also a very exciting thing, and you get to see some amazing places.
So being an archaeologist, you work in teams, and your personality that you must need to be sort of outgoing, maybe quite meticulous with the actual process. Is there any other sort of personality traits that somebody would need to go into this, or would be preferred?
You have to be okay with getting dirty, for sure. Like, you will find dirt in places you did not know existed. So that's a big one. You have to just kind of, and just be prepared it is a very physical job. You have to be crouching a lot. You have to be putting your body in uncomfortable positions. You have to be waking up super early in the morning, but then also you have to stay up super late at night because it's a very social thing. So it is a heavy, intense period when you're digging, but it's the most fun experience ever because everyone is in the same. They all like the same things, and they're all as passionate as you are, and you really just find your people, and then it doesn't feel like it's as emotionally or physically draining as it really is. So
when
you just have to be prepared for that.
When you talk about the social side, every time I watch Time Team, they were in the pub every night after they finished digging.
Yeah, that's it. You just kind of finish digging. You need a glass of wine or a pint of beer. And it really helps as well to just get that connection with the people you're working with, because it's a very high stress job because you're under the sun, physically exerted. So you need to make sure that you have a good relationship with who you're working with.
So what sort of positives have you taken out of the industry? What are some of the things you absolutely love about it?
To be honest, I love getting dirty. I just love being in, like a kid in a sandbox, essentially. The big positive is that I love the social aspect. You find people that you can really identify with and that are very genuine and just as nerdy as you are. Another big thing for me is I love studying people. People are so interesting, and we don't often give them enough time to really understand it. And if you look at history, you can really see that we've been the same for thousands of years, that everyone's had the same dramas, the same hopes and dreams, and it really puts your own life into perspective. So that's what I really love about it, because it really makes you check in with yourself, and it takes you out of yourself. You realize that, you don't have to be as kind of worried about things and everything. It's very human. I always say archaeology is a very human profession.
So I was thinking about sort of similar thing recently. How comes that in the last 5 or 6 or maybe even 8,000 years, humankind developed civilizations? Because we've been around for like a couple 100,000 years as we are now. Why all of a sudden did we just start creating civilizations, 8,000 years ago?
Well, it was a lot of things had to go right. I'm not a big expert on prehistory, so I can't give you the most exact definition of it. But if you look at how we evolved, you can see that there came a point where we were able to form more of a community, and with changing climates and things, we started to settle into certain areas. And once you are able to, for example, begin to farm, like some crops start to grow, and as our brains develop as early humans, to be able to realize, okay, if we plant this, then this will grow and we can domesticate this and we can control it, then you start to be more settled. And then from there, seeing if as you have more access to food and better nutrition, then you're able to have more children and you can be more sedentary. You don't have to look for food, which means that you can kind of grow, and then other people will also come to that same area because it has a good place to farm or anywhere like that. And then you have to start working together with things, and that's kind of how civilizations kind of form. It's a very, it's humans trying to survive, and that we found that's the best way to thrive. And then once you can just wait for your crops to grow, you don't have to worry so much about eating the next day or where your food's going to come from. So then you can focus on other things.
So it's kind of like a snowball effect.
Long thing.
It's, one thing leads to the next, and it gets better and faster.
Exactly. So that's how we've been able to just kind of skyrocket. And even in the last century, you've seen how much we've been able to progress. Mm. And it's human evolution is just absolutely insane. And I have recently read a really short book about it by Robert Kelly. And finally you get to like actually understand, for me, getting, the early human stuff that I hadn't studied before. And you see how, we've always been the same. And then with that extra time, we can do more and more, and then we can experiment more. There's also a really bad joke, sort of a joke, that beer is the reason we have civilization.
Is it?
And yes, well, you get the grain, and you realize if it ferments a little bit in some liquid or something, it starts to bubble, and it's not a bad beverage. But in order to make beer in mass amounts, you need farming, you need agriculture, you need to be able to irrigate your fields, which means that you need to have an organized society and all that fun stuff.
I think the other thing is humans, we're quite lazy. Keeping a pen of animals and growing stuff is easier than going out, finding it and killing it. In my opinion anyway.
That's it. Yeah. It's more reliable too. It's a safer way to make sure you can eat through the winter, especially if you're in a more of a hostile environment or climate.
So what would be some of the less favorable things regarding the job?
It's not very well paid, not at all, depending on where you are, but especially in certain areas, most areas, except maybe Australia. I hear they get paid very well, but it's not very well paid. It can be very difficult to get a job, especially if you want to get a higher up position or if you want to teach. And it can be very unreliable because a lot of the work, even commercial work, is contract based. So a lot of the times you are working and Thursday comes around and you don't know if you're working on Monday. You wait for that call. So you can't really make a lot of plans, and you can't really have a big financial future. Sometimes you have to go where the work is. So it's also very hard to kind of cement yourself in one spot. So those are the main challenges for sure.
We do a little bit of research on the show. We talk a little bit about money and earnings. And I did some research on figures for sort of salaries for archaeologists. I assume this is all commercial. So they sort of range between 20 to 30,000. Does that sort of resonate with you? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would say the lower ends of the 20s would be like what you would expect if you're a trainee position and I am going off of UK because I have been looking for commercial work there, and I've been familiar with it. So it's about, as a trainee position, you get between 18 and 20. And as a regular excavator or site assistant, you get about 20 to 23, depending on where you are, and it can go up. But 30 would be maybe, senior executive, supervisor level type thing.
Got you. Is university the only way into archaeology, or could, say, an amateur just offer their services and go and help on a dig and maybe get in that way, or do you need the PhD and the masters, as you said earlier?
In order to do commercial, you definitely need a bachelor's, especially nowadays if you're doing that kind of work, because it's a very regulated position and there's a lot of legality involved around there. But in other countries, you can definitely, sort of work your way up. You can become a trainee, you can become an archaeologist, but in order for you to sort of move up the ladder, let's say, they do supervisors and things, you do need more proper education. But that shouldn't stop anyone from trying archaeology, because there's so many field schools out there that you can volunteer for without any training, and they'll take you on for 2 weeks to a month or more, and you can learn all the basics there and just really experience it and see if it's something you want to do.
So what would be something that's not in the job description that you have to deal with?
Ooh, I would just say the early mornings. I'm not a morning person.
But the dirt's not too bad.
Waking up at 5 a.m. No, you expect the dirt, you don't expect, maybe you see Indiana Jones and everyone, and yeah, they're in dirty places, but they don't get dirty. Like, you get dirty. So that's maybe something to keep in mind.
So
how do you
progress once you're in the industry? You mentioned, becoming supervisor on commercial. Is that just a case of experience and getting years under your belt?
Pretty much. I don't have too much commercial experience in that sense, but in order to progress, you do need to have, certain levels of experience within where you are working. That's the main thing. If you kind of are staying in one spot, that really helps. So if you're only digging in the UK or just in England, and a lot of English history, English pottery, and you've paid your dues, essentially, you've done a few years, you can move up that way. It is all experience based. So it really does help to make sure you're not flying around to different countries every year to do work.
Would you still go into the industry knowing what you know now?
Yes, definitely. I tried to do the practical route and try and get a job that paid properly and was more reliable, but it ate me up inside, and I just had to go back to my roots essentially and do what I love doing.
Awesome. That's brilliant to hear.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. I've had really interesting chat.
Thanks so much for having me. It was really fun. I love talking about archaeology, so any opportunity to do so.
Where can people find you on Instagram and YouTube, as you've
find me
earlier?
Oh yes, you can find me at Dig It with Raven on all the social platforms.
Fantastic.
Brilliant.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks, Raven.
Yeah, enjoy the rest of your day.
And
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.